2023 was another great year for horror, and another year that proved that while Hollywood is currently in a period of decline for mega-budget blockbusters, the horror genre is seemingly bulletproof at the box office. Between the generally low budgets of horror fare and the ever-eager audience of teens and gore fiends happy to watch them all, it's incredibly difficult for a horror movie to flop commercially. And yet, as 2023 also proved, it does happen. And more to the point, it doesn't just happen to bad movies either. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture here with 10 awesome 2023 horror movies that didn't deserve to flop. Number 10, Infinity Pool. Even though Brandon Cronenberg's Infinity Pool was never going to become a breakout hit with the masses, the filmmaker's growing esteem with horror fans following the success of his previous film Possessor, combined with rising genre star Mia Goth playing the lead role, nevertheless suggested that it might offer a decent return on Neon's investment. But despite releasing in 1,835 theatres in North America alone, and benefiting from strong reviews, Infinity Pool grossed a paltry $5.2 million worldwide. And while the distributor has never disclosed the film's budget, it's reasonable to assume that it costs somewhere in the $10 to $20 million ballpark. And so, netting a mere fraction of its price tag theatrically isn't gonna cut it. Though Infinity Pool likely fared better on streaming, especially with the theatrical cut being trimmed down to avoid an audience-annihilating NC-17 rating, there's no looking at this movie and dubbing it a financial success. Given Cronenberg's terrific work behind the camera and the courageous efforts of his cast, though, it's a damn shame that it didn't do better. Number 9, The Wrath of Becky. This sequel to 2020's surprisingly fun revenge horror thriller Becky received a tiny theatrical release from distributor Quiver Distribution at the start of the summer, landing in just 274 cinemas in North America. But even with the sequel releasing in over 200 cinemas more than the first film, which dropped in just 54, The Wrath of Becky ended up grossing just $202,110 in total. Even accepting that Quiver gets most of its revenue from streaming sales, the film's final box office haul was less than 20% of what the first film made, during an especially egregious period of the pandemic, no less. Despite Becky becoming something of a cult hit on streaming and the sequel enjoying markedly better reviews, it still wasn't enough to move the needle much in this case. With the film also setting up a third Becky, we can only hope that this thing pulls gangbusters business on VOD in order to make that happen. Number 8, Renfield. Now, it would be disingenuous to suggest that Renfield was anything close to a perfect movie, because it certainly isn't. But if you can forgive its rather uneven cop thriller side plot, Nicolas Cage and Nicholas Hoult are note perfect as Count Dracula and his titular overworked lackey. Despite positive pre-release hype and decent reviews, Renfield was ultimately a catastrophic box office bomb, grossing just $26.7 million globally against a wildly outsized $65 million budget. Clearly, this thing needed a more responsible price tag, but even then, Nicolas Cage's recent run of commercial underperformances at the box office suggests that his militant online fandom just doesn't translate into tickets bought, sadly. The sheer exuberance of Cage's performance alone ensures that Renfield should have found an audience, and Universal would have probably been smarter to release it around Halloween in September or October, rather than semi-randomly tossing it off in the middle of April. Number 7, Suitable Flesh. Joe Lynch's Suitable Flesh was quite decisively one of the best-reviewed horror flicks of the entire year. Heather Graham gives a career-best performance in this wonderfully silly body swap horror, which gamely adapts H.P. Lovecraft's The Thing on the Doorstep in the vein of genre master Stuart Gordon. As an added seal of approval, Gordon's regular alum Barbara Crampton is also along for the ride. Despite its sexy, schlocky appeal as a big-screen B-movie, which frankly we need more of these days, Suitable Flesh was ultimately only released in 43 cinemas domestically, where it generated a paltry $22,751. Even accepting that the budget clearly wasn't more than a few $1 million, deciding to release it on VOD the same day, always a risky stunt, wasn't really doing the movie any favours at all. Number 6, The Outwaters. The Outwaters is one of the most unique and innovative found-footage horror films released in recent years. A hallucinogenic, downright experimental stab at the subgenre centered around a group of friends who encounter strange supernatural phenomena in the Mojave Desert. Given the positive word of mouth from genre film festivals and mysterious marketing campaign, many anticipated that The Outwaters would follow in the footsteps of the year's biggest micro-budget horror hit Skinamarink and utterly detonate the box office, relative to its budget at least. But while The Outwaters more than recouped its $15,000 budget theatrically with a total worldwide gross of $83,999, it ultimately failed to become the breakout cult hit many were anticipating. Number 5. When Evil Lurks. Argentine horror When Evil Lurks has enjoyed near-universal critical acclaim ever since its Sundance premiere, enough that it seemed like IFC Films' theatrical run could generate some solid cash from word of mouth in the weeks before it released on Shudder. And yet, despite having even better reviews than the year's big indie horror hit Talk to Me, it topped out at an underwhelming $802,077 worldwide. Moreover, even though IFC released it in a not bad 659 cinemas in North America, its per-cinema average on release weekend was a pitiful $304. Some horror fans choose to blame IFC for failing to sufficiently market the film given its not insignificant theatrical rollout, where it limped along in cinemas for 2 weeks before being pulled. In the very least, though, the film did pick up traction on social media once it was released on Shudder, with many praising it for offering up a chilling twist on the exorcism movie in every way that The Exorcist Believer, which depressingly made over $130 million worldwide, categorically didn't. Number 4. It Lives Inside. When the first trailer dropped, It Lives Inside looked destined for box office glory. Between its culturally specific through line, the much ballyhooed involvement of Get Out producer Sean McGittrick, and both trailers racking up more than 10 million views on YouTube pre-release, it seemed like Neon had an easy commercial win on their hands. Now, It Lives Inside didn't go below $1 million like many movies on this list, but it did settle for a rather dim $6.8 million globally, an especially disappointing result given that Neon released it on 2,005 screens in North America. Even if it wasn't a Talk to Me level success, there was at least a reasonable expectation that it could gross $20 to $30 million theatrically on that many screens, rather than being received with utter indifference by audiences. Number 3. Unwelcome. Given that folk horror film Unwelcome had the backing of Warner Brothers behind it, it was reasonable to assume they put the might of their marketing machine into promoting this one. And yet, the new dark comedy horror from John Wright came and went without making a dent in both its UK and stateside releases near the start of the year. Even with Warner distributing a fun premise of a couple battling goblins surrounding their home, decent reviews and rising actress Hannah John Carmen in the lead role, Unwelcome proved quite unwelcome itself theatrically, sinking like a stone with a final cume of $392,846. Was it the best horror film of the year? No, but it was a gonzo blast in its own right, aided by Wright's quirky filmmaking sensibilities and the enthusiastic performances of its cast. That it had so much going for it and yet was listlessly cast off into cinemas with the bare minimum of marketing presence is such a shame. Number 2. Beau is Afraid. There was no bigger, no more depressing horror flop in 2023 than Ari Aster's mesmerizing, if also understandably divisive, surreal horror comedy Beau is Afraid. Aster's Joaquin Phoenix starring 3-hour epic was nothing if not a pure, uncut passion project from the filmmaker, who evidently convinced A24 to give him $35 million to make the movie, after giving them back-to-back box office hits with Hereditary and Midsommar. Few were expecting his third feature, an aggressively confronting, unsettling, and materially strange genre mishmash, to repeat the commercial success of what came before, though horror fans were at least hopeful the weirdos would turn out for it regardless. Yet that price tag, almost double the budgets of Hereditary and Midsommar combined, ensured a road to profitability was basically impossible, and Aster's film ended up grossing a pitiful $11.5 million globally. Aster himself expressed disappointment with its performance, and the film's failure reportedly played a part in A24's recent decision to expand into developing bigger budget, more IP-focused projects. Though Beau is Afraid likely fared better on streaming than theatrically, it's still a sad fate for one of the most creative and uncompromising movies of the year, coming from a true visionary filmmaker. Number 1. Birth, Rebirth. Here's a horror movie that was released to bafflingly little fanfare this past summer, despite scoring rave reviews from critics ever since its Sundance premiere at the start of the year. Rebirth offers a brilliantly twisted contemporary riff on the classic Frankenstein story, which leads two beleaguered women down a horribly dark path, elevated by outstanding performances from Marin Ireland and Judy Reyes. And yet, going by its theatrical receipts, you'd barely know it was worth bothering with at all. IFC Films released the film in 137 theatres back in August, where it pulled in just $138,617, a mere pittance compared to what it deserved for both its fun reimagining of Frankenstein and terrific central performances. The blow is surely cushioned somewhat by Shudder producing the movie, ensuring it streamed there following its theatrical run, but if this movie had the marketing might of, say, Talk to Me's A24, it could have theoretically grossed a pretty penny on the big screen too.